the Doctoring Differently podcast. I'm Dr. Naomi Lawrence-Reid, your host, a pediatrician, and creator of the Doctoring Differently digital course that teaches physicians of all specialties how to find and explore flexible, lucrative careers beyond full-time clinical medicine. For more information, visit doctoringdifferently.com. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Jennifer Davis to the podcast. Dr. Davis is a child abuse pediatrician and founder of San Diego Menopause, a private practice that treats and counsels women through their menopause transition. Dr. Davis earned her medical degree from the Medical College of Georgia, and she completed residency at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I'm so excited about this guest and all of the guests on the podcast. You won't want to miss any of it. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to the Doctoring Differently YouTube channel to watch all of the episodes on YouTube. And now for my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Davis. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Davis. Happy to have you today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to do this. This is exciting.
It is. As I said in the intro, Dr. Davis is a child abuse pediatrician turned menopause specialist, and I am so fascinated by her journey and to get into how this remarkable journey happened. You're also the first pediatrician I've welcomed onto the podcast, and so that is particularly interesting and exciting for me. So let's go back to medical school, as I do with all of my physician guests, and talk about why you initially selected pediatrics as your specialty.
I think in medical school, I was in the Deep South. Training in Georgia, and there were a lot of adult rotations, and it was when I did my first pediatrics rotation that I was so excited that I really felt alive and that it actually felt like fun. It didn't feel as much like work. And there aren't that many pediatric rotations in med school, so I was well into it by the time I did. I had a little exposure in family medicine and then more exposure in pediatrics, but it just, I would say it was just more like joyful to interact with the kids. And it just felt a little bit more rewarding, to go in every day and deal with small people. You know, your patients tickle you and hug you and things that don't happen in the adult world that aren't appropriate. And it was just a lot more fun to me, basically.
Sure. I say that children smell better than adults, and that was a major deciding factor for me. There's no smell a child can make that's close to what an adult can generate. So that
is very true. One of the other things that I found sort of frustrating being in the area that I trained in was there was just a lot of overweight smokers, diabetics that didn't want to sort of take responsibility for their own health. And as someone who takes great responsibility for my own health, I struggled with that. And you don't really have that as much in pediatrics. You don't really deal with children typically haven't sort of, I don't want to say caused their problems or issues, but it's not usually due to choices that they've made. And that was a little more rewarding.
Right. Okay, so then we're into pediatrics residency. How did that go? How did you see your future career as a pediatrician, as a resident?
I loved residency. Residency was a magical and incredibly stressful time. We just actually had a reunion. We had 3 classes that were pretty close, and so we just had a reunion in Nashville last month to just kind of get together 20 years later and see how everybody was. So residency was wonderful, super challenging. I will say one of the things that kind of shaped me was people started to point out personality traits that I had that weren't typical of pediatricians. I was a little more assertive, a little more maybe aggressive or confrontational, and I never meant it in a harmful. But when people give you feedback, you have to kind of listen to it. And I had known in my childhood that I had some of those traits. And so that played in a little bit to the next career path that I chose. And some people were okay with those traits and other people were sort of thrown off by them a little bit.
Okay, I understand. I will say I appreciate an assertive pediatrician. So those traits that maybe are not typical of pediatricians, I think we probably could benefit from adopting more of, I think, what you're describing in terms of assertive and maybe not shying away from confrontation. Hey, but I do understand what you're saying, and maybe there were some conflicts then, but hopefully all of those traits have brought you to where you are. So next step. So you enjoyed residency. Sounds like you were a tight-knit group. And then fellowship. What happens next?
So I was planning, well, the plans changed a little bit, but part of this, well, you're kind of confrontational. You sit down with the residency director. You know, some people find you intimidating. That was a weakness that I was like, how is this going to be a strength? And I was already kind of drawn to child abuse and was doing a subspecialty elective in child abuse, which, as you know, and maybe everybody doesn't, not a lot of doctors want to go into child abuse, and it's very necessary, and there's a massive nationwide shortage. So my fellowship was pediatric emergency medicine, and it was supposed to be combined with child abuse, which ended up changing a little bit and coming primarily child abuse. But I think in that field, it's very confrontational, and you have to be very strong. You're testifying in court, you're talking to police and CPS. And so I was really good in that arena. The things that made me maybe a little pushy in a hospital setting made me really good in a forensic pediatric courtroom setting. I didn't get the same level of nervousness as most of my colleagues. I just was sort of like, I've got this. Like,
this
is my arena.
Did you start pediatric ER fellowship, and then was that a combined peds ER fellowship with child abuse? How was that?
I did. So I was staying at the same institution where I did my residency, and the plan was to complete a 3-year emergency medicine fellowship. We only had the one child abuse doctor, and he had agreed to take me on and train me. Child abuse was not yet boarded. It was heading there, but it wasn't a subspecialty yet. So I was going to do 4 years instead of 3, and we were going to add in child abuse. Most child abuse presents to the emergency room anyway, so it was a natural fit. And then due to sort of political changes at the hospital and funding for his clinic, he ended up leaving at the end of my first year. And so then I had no one to train me in child abuse. So I actually made the decision to leave as well after 1 year of emergency medicine fellowship and came out to California to complete child abuse fellowship.
Okay. So how were those first few years as a child abuse pediatrician or specialist? I think this might be where our paths crossed in the pediatric ER, but how were those first few years as an attending?
Absolutely. So as a fellow, I was still working in the ER, and even as an attending working in the ER, taking moonlighting shifts, just because that was a natural place for me to be. Sure. The beginning fellowship was tough for reasons I didn't anticipate. I think if you've ever heard the term vicarious trauma, I had a lot of vicarious trauma. And what that means is when you are witnessing violence and trauma and horrible things all day long, it starts to weigh on you. And I think as caregivers and physicians, we don't see that coming. So I would say maybe child abuse is probably the highest volume of that. You're sort of seeing the worst of humanity and seeing it day in and day out, just things that you can't even imagine. But it's true of all, emergency room physicians, people that do geriatrics, and even just your PCPs. People are bringing you their trauma. They're bringing you their fears. They're bringing you their anxiety. And so I think that was so much at a higher level that I struggled to figure out how to process that initially. And it was sort of making me tired and frustrated. So it took me a couple years to figure out the best ways to manage that vicarious trauma. And I think it's more studied now because this was over 15 years ago. I think people are more aware of it, but it also happens to psychologists and veterinarians and environmental scientists. It's just kind of taking in that information all the time can be, it can just sort of add up, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. I think that probably resonates with most of the physician listeners in terms of just feeling like oh, am I just supposed to hear these horrible things and, do this labor in this way for this entire career without, quite frankly, much support from our institutions, much mental health care specifically for physicians, and even, being there can be restrictions on licensure renewal for even being on an antidepressant or an SSRI or treating these traumas and depressions and anxiety, which almost all of us have endured PTSD from our training, and then, day-to-day patient care.
Absolutely. I definitely have PTSD from the child abuse days. There are things that I will see on TV, and they'll sort of come back in. And I had some hypervigilance for a while just because of all the violence that I was exposed to. And it was interesting. There was, I don't want to say, there was just sort of minimal support from the institution, I guess is the best way to say it. I think my close coworkers and mentors knew what it was and wanted to be supportive and helpful. Maybe they didn't have the knowledge or resources, but I would say on like a hospital-wide level, there was zero acknowledgement of that. And so it was basically up to me to sort out, well, how are you going to deal with this and be able to go home and still be a good partner and still have hope in humanity and still have energy. And that took a little trial and error. And I just sort of found the ways that worked best for me on my own. And that actually led me down a whole different life path as well that has been very useful to this day.
Sure. Okay. We're still going. We're going. I feel like we've already been on a journey in your career. So what came after maybe stepping away from your position as a full-time child abuse pediatrician? What was your next step after that?
Right. So I did the child abuse work for about 10 years, and that is the average clinical lifespan of a child abuse physician, is they can basically kind of handle 10 years and then tend to move into research, academics, leadership. And I was moved into leadership at the hospital where I worked, and it just wasn't a great fit for me. I felt that I had all of this responsibility and zero ability to affect any change at all. And that just became increasingly frustrating. And I hadn't really seen that side of it before. I just felt like people were depending on me and my hands were tied with what I could do. And so I just decided to leave. I was just really miserable. And I did. I tried for 2 years. It's kind of, I tried communication. I think of it like almost like marriage counseling. Like I said what I needed and I tried and I, advocated for the physicians that were working under me and for my department. And then after a couple of years of nothing changing and no one showing me that they had any intention of, supporting my department, I just decided to leave, and I needed to stay in the city that I'm in. So I opened a private pediatrics practice in general pediatrics.
Okay. So I think a lot of physicians and non-physicians, frankly, think that the solution to burnout and to all of the things you described, a lot of our issues with academic medicine, with corporate medicine, can be solved in private practice, right? Being your own boss, despite the fact that there are so many fewer, there are just not as many private practices anymore as there used to be. And I think physicians are actively told, oh, don't worry about the billing and we'll take care of it if you just work in this large hospital. And I remember hearing that you'd started your own practice and was incredibly impressed. How did that go, working private practice, working for yourself?
It was very successful. It went very well. Obviously, it was hugely challenging. I think kind of one of the take-home points, and one of the ways I've tried to live my life is sort of stepping into fear and stepping into challenges. If I feel that I am not valued where I am and that it is making my life miserable and that I have tried everything I can, I'm going to do something differently. And so I don't want to act like it wasn't a massive amount of work, but there was excitement in creating it because it was mine.
Yes.
And when something was broken, instead of asking 17 committees over the course of 6 months to fix it, I could fix it in a day. I could
Yes.
just make it
Yes.
better. I had such power to affect change that was meaningful for my patients and my staff and my doctors. And there was a creativity to it and a lot of like evolution. I would have a doctor that was like, I really love ADHD. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. Let's get you this special machine. Let's really promote this. Let's figure out how are we going to bill and get reimbursed for this? How does this serve our existing population? There were always little projects that you could sort of add to it. And so it was an enormous amount of work and it was a huge learning curve.
Sure.
But it was very rewarding for the time that I did that. I had that practice for 8 years.
Wow. Okay. I'm continue to be impressed with how you grew that practice and the physicians and the staff you had working. And it seemed every time I popped in, you had a full waiting room, and it seemed like a very well-run, well-oiled machine. So I could see the fruits of your labor in terms of tweaking and as you said, seeing something, saying something, doing something, which anyone who's worked in academics or big centers, as you've described, that autonomy, that control, that ability, the person, seeing the patient to make decisions doesn't really exist in that space, but it did for you in your private practice.
It did. And that was huge because I take a lot of pride in the things that I do. And so if you're doing something that's not working or that you don't even feel good about, that's a really hard place to be. And I was always able to fix it and with input from my staff and employees to provide better quality of care in a more efficient way, kinder way. So we grew from 0 patients to 12,000 patients in that time frame. So
Wow.
it was a great success.
Okay. So what was the next step? I think you stepped away at some point. You obviously have a new venture. What was that transition like?
I did. I guess I've decided I'm going to reinvent myself every decade or something. Or at least that I'm not afraid to reinvent myself
that's
every
not
decade.
a bad idea. I like that.
It's like let's pivot a little bit. But honestly, some of it was personal. It was COVID. COVID hit, and I happened to get divorced during COVID, and so the stress of divorce combined with the stress of being a small business owner and physician, it was hard enough to be a physician during COVID and on the front lines. But then I'm also figuring out how I'm going to pay everybody and what I'm going to do with these supply chain issues and how are we going to see kids in the parking lot because nobody wants to come inside the building and what's the latest research on this or that. So honestly, I quite frankly just got burnt out. I had pretty severe burnout from kind of that chronic stress of those couple of years, just piled on being on call for 20 years and working. And I really, I didn't take the decision to sell my practice lightly, but I always sort of go back, and I think this is a good tool to how is this making me feel? Because your body will tell you, right? This was a profitable practice. It was a great job. But if you're getting headaches all the time and you're tired all the time, or you're having stomach aches just when you kind of have to go in and, prepare for the day, and it feels more like a battle than, work or joyful career, it's again time to sort of take some action and then couple that with the hormonal changes I was going through that I didn't even realize. I sold that practice to a local practice here in San Diego.
Okay. And I think, again, many listeners, I know myself, can identify with that feeling of dread going to a place that, well, you don't want to go to.
Right.
And I think we can all, we've been conditioned to numb ourselves to that feeling that, well, this is our life now. This is the dread. This is a feeling that I just have to, it's my fault. It's my problem. When really, maybe we need to change our situation.
I honestly feel that the majority of physicians, part of your training is to numb yourself. We are so good at it. We are so good at compartmentalizing. And there are arenas where that serves you, right? I was in the ER in fellowship. And yes, if someone died in one room and I needed to move on to the next room, I didn't get to go cry for 30 minutes. I had to put that away for later and go handle the situation. But that becomes such a toxic adaptive response in your day-to-day life, because you turn around and you're just like, wow, I'm actually miserable. And I've been ignoring all of these signs because I've been taught to. I've been literally programmed and trained to. And so I think one of the easiest things for me, I have a long history of yoga and meditation, a good 20-year practice of that, but it's sort of paying attention to physically, how do I feel? And how does this idea feel to me when I think about it? And it's like, does my heart sink and drop? Do I get a little smile? Or do I think there's ways to fix this? Or am I just really miserable and it's not serving me anymore?
Okay. Yep. I agree with that. Okay. So you sold the practice. What's next?
I did. So I sold the practice, and I think it's really important when you do things like this to choose the right people to listen to. So I've always kind of done what I'm going to do within reason. Everyone thought I was crazy, right? Everybody wanted to sort of put their fear on me, like, how are you walking away? Because I sold the practice with zero plan. And that's not true. My plan was, I will take 1 year off. I will make myself take 12 months off. And I wrote it down. I was like, you are going to take 12 months off. And it was a break, but it was also just to reevaluate, what do I actually want now? Do I still want to be a doctor? And if I do want to be a doctor, in what field? And do I want to work part-time? Do I want to work full-time? And I wanted to be inspired. I think frequently we find ourselves in situations where it's like, well, I better get a job now, or I better get a job before I leave this job. And that sometimes lands you in another place that is not that fulfilling. And so I made myself take the time off. And that was a little bit like hitting a brick wall. I mean, I was already doing yoga and meditation, but when you go from working 50 plus hours a week to not working at all, you have a lot of time to sit with your thoughts. And you have to make your mind a calm place to be. And so I rely on yoga, journaling, meditation, as I've mentioned, but I was sort of waiting for inspiration. And I found it in my own body, which is probably part of what was happening to me in the pediatric practice with perimenopause. I basically went into perimenopause, it just leveled me. It just absolutely leveled me. And that sort of changed the whole trajectory of where I am now.
I like when you said you needed to take that break and to take that rest. You've described the hamster wheel, the treadmill of medical training, and then straight into your medical career. And we are never given permission to think in any way outside of our full-time clinical training. And I think that is very much by design. We just go and go and go and go. And as you've said, you had to take that break to really understand and to have a full appreciation of what was going on in your body and what your next step would be. And I'm excited to hear how that intersected for you. So it sounds like you were going through perimenopause. You were in this place of, hopefully, it sounds like, maybe travel, maybe establishing some peace after selling the practice, getting through the pandemic. Okay, so how did San Diego Menopause come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is really important for people to give themselves permission to take time off, because when you actually sit with yourself and hear, like, what do I want? What do I actually want my life to look like? And actually picture it. I loved treating patients. I loved sort of that like healing modality. I didn't really want to be an administrator. You know, I had the qualifications to be that, but I really enjoyed that patient interaction. I just couldn't do it in the way I had done it before. It was draining me and it was exhausting, and that was not an option. And so a couple months after selling the practice, I sort of stopped sleeping, and I was traveling the world and I was doing all these great adventures, and I just really couldn't sleep at night. And then I started having hot flashes all night. And I was 45 at the time, and I had no idea. It took me, I think, 2 months of hot flashes, full on soaking wet in the bed, to realize that I was in late perimenopause. And it was so shocking because I'm a doctor. I had zero idea. I thought maybe in my head when I was 50, this might be something. And I'm actually normal. I'm not early into this. This is when it hits women, is in the mid 40s. And so you get these massive mood changes, you get fatigue, you get the weight gain, you get the sleepless nights, the hot flashes. You just become kind of a totally different person. And I could not find really good help in San Diego in a timely manner for myself. I knew that I needed estrogen therapy, and I couldn't get anyone to prescribe that for me. And so that launched me down sort of doing my own research, and then watching my friends fall into the same category as me, and then getting formal training so that I could. So it just became something that I was really passionate about. And I was like, I want to help other women do this, since it's so hard to find healthcare providers that are willing to have this conversation, and that actually have this training.
That's right.
So here we are.
Here we are. Okay. On that note, let's take a quick break. And when I'm back, more with Dr. Jennifer Davis and her journey from being a pediatrician, continuing to be a pediatrician, but segueing into a menopause specialist. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm with Dr. Jennifer Davis, founder of San Diego Menopause. Before the break, we were talking about the importance of taking a rest and a break, which few physicians are afforded at any point in their career, and how so many of us struggle with the identity of always working, much less just working in our specialty in our practice without any consideration of what else could be out there for us, but always going, always working. And when you are going and working so hard, you just never develop the creativity or the space or time or capacity to be able to consider what's best for you, what's bad about where you are, where you want to be, and what your true desires for you, your life, your family are. So Dr. Davis was expounding on that in a really thoughtful way. So next steps, she sold her private pediatrics practice. She described beginning to personally experience some symptoms of perimenopause at 45, and then recognizing that we as physicians have very little understanding or training or education ever about menopause, and perhaps not being able to even find a provider to provide estrogen therapy. What were your next steps, Dr. Davis?
Right. So I'm sitting there with all this time, and I've done all this reading, and I've learned there's this massive shortage of menopause doctors. It's only 20% of OBGYN residencies offer, not mandate, offer menopause training. And that number is far less in internal medicine and family medicine. So when residents were surveyed in 2000, I believe it was 15, 8% of residents in OBGYN, internal medicine, and family practice were comfortable discussing menopause, much less like prescribing and treating. And so it's eight,
I'm going to say that one more time. I want to emphasize that 8% of internal medicine and family medicine residents were comfortable
OBGYN.
And OBGYN residents were comfortable talking about menopause, which is something that every single woman will experience in their lifetime, probably earlier than we think we will. Okay, please continue. I wanted to emphasize that point.
Correct. And there were several different studies, but that was sort of the take-home point, is the overwhelming majority of doctors don't have training in it. And in those surveys, they did express that they wanted more training, that they wished that they had had more training. And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, I want to be a doctor and I've wanted to do something. So how do I make this leap of, I'm a pediatrician. Menopause doesn't occur in children, right?
No, it does
not. How am I going to treat adults now? And how am I going to make this happen? Because it is half of our population for 40% of our lives. And I'm very passionate about it because it was so significant for me. I think one of the interesting things people don't realize, about 90,000 women in this country every year quit their jobs. in their mid-40s or early 50s due to menopause because they can't handle the sleepless nights and the mood changes. So to me, I started thinking like I would like to be part of keeping women in the workforce when they're at the pinnacle of their knowledge and wisdom and have so much to offer. It saddens me to think that just a lack of appropriate care for menopause is enough to sort of make you just leave and walk away. And so I was studying and reading things and starting to follow different physicians on social media, and I stumbled across Mary Claire Haver, who is leading the charge towards changing the narrative on menopause in this country. So she's an OBGYN, and she's written several books, the most recent of which, The New Menopause, just came out a few weeks ago, which is fantastic. But she has, she's probably over 3 million followers now on social media. So just women are just kind of flocking to her. And she's very evidence-based, really trying to get the word out so that the rest of us sort of know what to expect. And so I literally went to her website and submitted an inquiry as if I was a patient. But I said, I'm a pediatrician. Yes. And I'm considering this, and I have no idea what to do or if this is a crazy idea. And this woman booked an hour to talk to me. You know, she's so incredibly busy. Yes. And she literally, her office staff was like, are you free October 18th or whatever? And I was like, I'm blown away. Like, I literally can't even believe that this worked, right? She's not even in my state. She's across the country. And so we were talking about it, and she's really passionate about getting providers, you know, educated and getting help to more women. And so she was like, yes, you can absolutely do this. She said, you know, there's certain things you're not going to do, like procedures and things that you weren't trained in, you know, sort of remember that. But when we talk about menopause, that is medicine, and it is counseling, and it is prescribing. And yes. And so she routed me to the Menopause Society. So they have trainings, and they actually have a certification exam that I was able to take last week. And that was super helpful because as a doctor, you're like, well, I need some proof of my knowledge base. Yes. And she routed me to some other courses as well. So she was just like, here's these sort of steps. And this is reasonable for you to do. One of the other things that I realized as I started talking to more people was the vast majority of people doing menopause care were nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. And they don't ever feel like they're locked into their lane, right? They change any time and do whatever and jump. Yes, and I'm like, you know what? If they can do it, I feel like I should be able to make this leap.
Yes, you can.
I feel like I have the intelligence. Like, I'm going to do this too. So they were kind of, that sort of inspired me. I was like, why do we as doctors get so pigeonholed? We do it to ourselves. It's almost like the investment in your training all the years. Well, that's a sunk cost if you don't want to use it anymore. You know, move forward and decide what do you want to do now. And so that's what started that journey of getting me actually like trained and competent to see patients.
You described one of my favorite things, which is cold emailing or cold calling someone doing something you're interested in. That is how I have entered into so many different types of opportunities and activities, just being curious, sending out an email, sending out a call, doing that. And as you described perfectly, we do feel so pigeonholed. And like you, it was nurses I was working with in a pediatric ER who were starting different ventures and doing travel work and doing this and doing that. And all the pediatricians and all the physicians sitting like ducks in one place and just thinking, oh, well, if I want to do something else, I've got to go do a whole nother residency and I need to do a 3-year fellowship. But in fact, no, we are not really ever taught or exposed to the full breadth of our options as physicians. It's those 2 letters at the end of our names, our 2 degrees, our 2 letters are the key to so much. And as you learned, and maybe you didn't know initially, but you took a chance and emailed that woman, you are just as qualified to give menopause education, to prescribe to prescribe things that women need, and to change women's lives. Okay, so what was next? You took these certifications. Great job. What happened?
So It, I mean, it was probably for a year that I read literally nothing but menopause and watched menopause blogs and did menopause trainings. I kind of went over and above. I could have spent less time doing it. Now, keep in mind, I was traveling
Sure.
India, Nepal, Bali, doing all of that. And so then it came time. My 12 months I had given myself I was like,
Okay.
all right, here we are at 14, 15 months. I'm going to make this happen. I still had my corporation open from my last practice. And so my next thought was, are they going to give me malpractice insurance? Let me like go down this road, because that would obviously be a limiting factor if not. And it was like hilarious because my malpractice as a pediatrician was, I want to say like $13,000 a year, just for general pediatrics. And so I called my insurance broker that had helped me at my old clinic, and I'm giving him this whole spiel like, well, I'm not an OBGYN, but I've done all this menopause training. And, he's like, yeah. He's like, are you doing procedures or not? And he's like, cut to the chase, lady. And I was like, no, I'm not doing any procedures. It's going to be some telemedicine, some in-person. It's really just medicine and consultation. My malpractice is $4,000 a year, and it's nationwide coverage. And like
Oh my
they
goodness.
they wanted me to show that I had put in the time to learn about menopause, but like there were no roadblocks there. There was largely no difficulty there. I was expecting this like massive problem, and how am I going to find this? And I had multiple
Right.
people offering me malpractice. And so the malpractice was under general medicine is what they call it, but sort of spelled out that I'm basically doing menopause care in this population.
I will tell you how many times and how often does malpractice just live in our minds and brains as an impediment to exploring things. I think that's, again, by design. I'm very vocal about medical school residencies doing us a gross, nefarious misservice by not teaching us about malpractice. And I do think it's by design. It keeps us scared, and it keeps us in bad jobs, and it keeps us from pursuing ventures that we otherwise might consider, because we are so terrified of the unknown as humans. That's human nature. And we're so scared about protecting this very important degree and livelihood that we've worked so hard for. So thank you for describing that, the seeming ease with which you were able to demonstrate your competence, provide your certificates, show that you've done this training, and you're a physician. You are so capable of learning new things, as we all are, and how your malpractice, I think, decreased by 2/3. So congratulations there.
Well, and the moral of the story is, again, like, just make the phone call. Like, it
Yeah.
was living as this thing in my mind, like, what am I going to do if they won't insure me? And it's like, okay, literally, this was a 15-minute phone call, lady. Just do it. So
80.
he could say no, and then he would know that. But
Uh-huh.
these are the
Right.
conversations I have internally. Like, just make it happen.
Right.
So it really is sort of taking that step to call someone and just see what they have to say,
Yeah.
because like kind of doors just started opening. Like every time I turned around, I was like, oh, that's actually not that difficult. Like I can
Yeah.
actually do this. Roadblocks here and there. And so you have to always adapt and change and evolve.
That's right. That's
But
right.
it really is like just that taking that step and reaching out to other people that have that knowledge. And
Absolutely. And I have found that doing that, for the most part, people are so generous with their knowledge. When I was starting all my different doctoring
yes.
differently ventures, I reached out to so many different physicians about just something interesting they were doing, you included. And it was just such fascinating education. And we were scared to, quote unquote, look stupid or to not know things. But picking up the phone, I will say, I always give credit to those early physicians early in the day who just picked up the phone and got on a 1-hour call with me, like Dr. Haver did with you, and share their knowledge. I think we're just all better together, sharing our knowledge, sharing what we know. We don't need to hold things close to the chest. We don't need to be so isolated and tribal from each other anymore. We're all better, and this profession is better when we share. So please describe San Diego Menopause. What do you offer? How's that going? How many years has it? Months, years? How long have you been in practice, and what do you do on a daily basis?
Right. So we just opened in 2024, so have not been open very long. And
Congratulations.
there was a little bit of learning there. I thought in my head I would be really mostly telemedicine. I thought that would be what people would want since I'm not doing procedures or exams. And I did learn that you need a physical location for certain things like Google and Yelp, and controlling prescribing controlled substances like testosterone. So I did need a physical location. And so I got a cute little office and I cutesied it up, and then we open our doors, and like 60% of people wanted to be seen in person. So despite me setting it up as telemedicine, women are wanting to come in and be seen a lot of the time. And so I'm basically sort of listening to them, validating what they're going through, telling them they are not crazy, determining if hormone therapy is a safe and effective option for them, given their risk factors and age and this and that. And then talking additionally about sort of the holistic things of diet and exercise and sleep. And so it was very important, I think, sitting down with this practice to say, what do I want my life to be? And one of the funniest things, everybody makes fun of me for this, I am not a morning person. I am not a morning person, right? So I was like, this is mine. I'm not seeing patients before 10. Period. End of story. I happen to not have children, so I'm happy to stay later. I don't have to race off and get someone from school. And so it looks different for everyone. It's like, what bothers me? You know what bothers me? Getting to the hospital at 7:30 in the morning. I don't want to do it. What bothers me is having to be nice and friendly and smart at 8:30 in the morning. I am really good after 10 a.m. So that's how I set up my day and my schedule. I also, one of the things that weighed on me in my last practice was that constant list of patients. It was like rush, 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 rush. It was this feeling of you never have enough time, and someone is always waiting, and someone is always unhappy. So I made these appointments, hour-long appointments for initial consultations, because I want, when you have something emotional, you want to give people time to share how they're feeling, and you need to make sure they understand what you're saying. And if the little clock in the back of your mind is like, well, there's 3 people waiting and they're going to be upset, that's not a sustainable way to sort of have longevity. And I try to create calm and peace in my life. So I didn't want to set myself up with a crazy busy practice. And then the truth and the reality of that is I had to be in a cash pay model to do that. There would be zero chance of doing what I do in an insurance pay model, the way our system is, and have these longer appointments and have the luxury of doing that. And so I terminated all of my contracts, and we have a cash pay model for patients.
You have done a tremendous thing and are doing an amazing service for the women of San Diego, but also I suspect some of our listeners, maybe where they are at other parts in the country, are considering offering or transitioning into this kind of education and service, because as you said, half of our population spends 40% of their life in menopause. And those figures about how our medical education does not adequately equip or prepare us to even treat it, much less experience it ourselves, is a real lack. But so impressed with what you're doing. As we close, I'm going to ask you a question I ask all of my physician guests, and that is, did this version of your career happen on its own? Did it fall into your lap, or did you have to take some action in order to make it happen?
Well, I definitely had to take action to make it happen, but I would say in my entire life, it is sort of stepping into fear is the underlying thing. If you are not happy and something is not serving you, try something else. We always have people will stay in these miserable situations because they fear the unknown. And every time I have stepped into fear, I have gotten something better every single time. And it doesn't mean it wasn't work, and it doesn't mean it wasn't scary, and it doesn't mean I didn't have to push myself. But if I look back at the life that I was living 10, 12 years ago, no, thank you. No, I'm not going back there, and I'm not going to do that again. I mean, and it served me well, but
Sure.
Yeah, you sometimes have to step into fear and make bold changes.
That's right. And learning from every step, even those places we didn't enjoy 10, 12 years ago, we learned something every way, and it's brought us to where we are in our careers. Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Davis, for coming on the podcast.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
You're so welcome. Thank you again.